about what districts have done to make themselves fabulous. What they have done is completely revise how they work. We used to do mass production education. It's a phrase that gets used a lot, but think about it. What happened when all of you were in school? You had one teacher, one textbook, taught one way in one classroom. In the world of the bell curve, on a good day, maybe it caught the middle. The sides didn't get much, and in fact, the middle didn't necessarily get much. But it worked at a time when we thought everybody could go to a manufacturing shop and you didn't need a lot of education, or you were a minority, or you were learning challenge, we didn't care about you anyway. And then, we've spent the last 50 years understanding the rights of minorities, English language learners, special ed kids. And we've come to understand we have to educate every one of those children. And we further have come to understand that in a highly competitive global world, those poorly educated kids we used to send to manufacturing sites no longer can cut it, because that's not the world they're coming into. So for both economic and moral grounds, we need to do something different. The old mass production system is gone. The question is, what's Plan B? Now, Paul here can tell you what Plan B is better than I can, although by the book, I'll describe it for you in the book. But the point is, it's a system where you've moved a lot of decision-making from the central office out to the edge, as you would in any high-performing service business these days, and you've empowered those who deal with the customers, your kids, your parents, to actually tailor instruction, tailor needs to those children. It's not one textbook anymore. It's not one pedagogy. You have kids who learn differently, with different interests, with different levels of mastery the day you get them, with different social and emotional levels of development. And the goal is, as best you can, to try to deal with all of that. And the good news is, as daunting as it sounds, there are places that do a heck of a job. And they do it because they have determined that they're going to change both the instruction and they're going to change the entire support system around that. Let me give you one very small example of what that means. And Paul can probably give you 10 more. One of the really fascinating developments in the last 10 years is the growth of something called formative assessment. You and I used to call these things quizzes. Now you get one at like 10 minutes at the end of a day on Thursday, say. And teacher might tell you, oh, it's going to be 10% of your grade, all these things. And that was the only function these things had. Well, what if we gave you one of these things now, and it really didn't count for grade at all? What it did was, it was the start of a conversation between, say, all the fourth grade teachers about those kids who hadn't done well mastering fractions that week. So those results are immediately available. Those teachers look at them and they figure out how they're going to step in right then to intervene to help kids who are struggling. You don't wait 6 or 9 weeks for the kid to fail the semester exam in math and say, oh gee, I got a problem here. But it's not that simple. I mean, if nothing else, there's the challenge of the 4:30 bus. What if the strategy for helping these kids is we're going to try to extend the day to 4:30 and provide some tutoring? That's good. But then there's the question, is there a 4:30 bus to take these kids home? And if there's no 4:30 bus, you break down the system. If there's no time for teachers to collaborate so that those 4 fourth grade teachers can sit there and look at the results and figure out how they're going to adjust their resources to deal with the kids who are not doing well. Well, it breaks down again, because you don't simply want to leave this to one teacher in the silo of his or her class. Okay, well, you got to organize now so you have more time for teachers to collaborate. This system changes. And the problem is you can't dictate that from Washington. You can't dictate that from the state capitol. What you need is a superintendent and a bunch of administrators who understand the program. You need a supportive school board, and that's how you drive it, because you're turning around an entire ship. It's not one thing, it's not 10 things, and it's not demonizing anybody. It's certainly not demonizing teachers. It's bringing everybody along. And the problem with, going back to the law here, the good teacher, bad teacher trope, think about it. It really doesn't have much to do with that. And in fact, it may hurt it. And we don't know a lot about pay for performance yet. It's an interesting idea, the federal government's been spending between $300 and $400 million per year to test out various strategies about pay for performance. But what's interesting about it is 10 or 15 states have now adopted pay for performance, and the only research on pay for performance says it doesn't move the needle at all. It's getting weird, but it's worse than that. One of my great fears about pay for performance has been that individualized pay for performance runs the risk of undercutting that collaboration. Remember the 4 teachers who are getting together to talk about how to deal with all of the kids in 4th grade who are struggling with math? Well, it may be that if you pay for performance based on individual performance, you may undercut the collaboration you're otherwise trying to build. Now, I'm not opposed to trying out individual pay for performance just to see what happens. But we are enshrining these things long before we know whether they help at all or whether they are, in fact, negative. And it's the danger of trying to do things at a distance. It's a danger to try to do things one at a time. Folks in the trenches have a very different and more pragmatic view. And so the great question, I think, for lawyers in all of this, looking around, is to understand both the strengths and limits of lawmaking. We are responsible both for writing good laws and preventing bad laws. And at the local level, we have the capacity to get involved in school boards and understand the complexities of them as government institutions and apply our good common sense that we do as counselors for our clients in trying to make these things work as in a coherent, harmonious whole. And we haven't always done that. And we have, in fact, I think as a legacy of Brown, thought that we could litigate or legislate our way to equity and efficiency. We can't do that either very often. Because if you think about all of what I've talked about, no court, no special master is going to be able to turn around a mass production system into a high-performing system based on differentiated instruction. It isn't going to work that way. So our role, I think, needs to change from the role we've traditionally conceived it to be, because we now understand how to drive high performance. With that, I'll turn it over to my friends. Thank you. Thank you.
So should I jump in?
Yes, please.
All right. So first of all, thank you to Kay and Kate and the ABA and everyone who is here this rainy morning. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. Even if we are a panel of white guys, I hope we get some good conversation going, and we are provocative. And one of the things I will say is that the work that I do at Democracy Prep is very much in the spirit and hopefully the legacy of Thurgood Marshall and Brown v. Board, and I don't think our panel necessarily represents that. So we need to be blunt about this and working on it. I'm glad that you pointed it out, Kay. So first, about me, I'm born and raised in New York City. I went to New York City public schools, K-12, and so I talk really fast, and I hope to be provocative, and I hope to be bold and challenge some of the assumptions that you walked into this room with. The first thing that you should know is what I believe is democracy. And as lawyers, I'm sure that you think about this often, and I thought about it often in graduate school and undergrad, and it was not until I opened a network of schools called Democracy Prep, and I was in my second year, that I actually thought about this question in a way that profoundly changed the work that I do. Because one of my kids said, and we had been teaching a civics class, and we'd been teaching what is democracy, and they said, "What is democracy, Mr. Andrew?" And I gave them this long answer about checks and balances and branches of government, and it was a terrible answer for a sixth grader, right? It was incomprehensible for a sixth grader. And I went back to our faculty and I said, "Guys, we're in trouble. We run a network of schools called Democracy Prep, and I can't answer what is democracy." And so I turned it over to our amazing teachers, and Ms. Birdsell, one of our 7th grade teachers, came back and said, "We've worked on it, we've got an answer that 6th graders will understand, and this is democracy. Democracy is choice and voice. And that's it. Nothing else. If you have choice and voice, you have a democracy. If you don't have choice or voice, if you're missing either element, you don't have a democracy." And so if we can give our kids choice and voice, we will be both supporting our democracy, our American democracy, and we'll be giving them the tools of citizenship that they need to be great citizens in our democracy and to help to build democratic systems around their community, around the country, around the world. And so we found the answer to what is democracy a little bit late, but I knew pretty early on that I wanted to use that goal to build schools that actually serve the kids that needed the most. And so I went to New York City public schools, and I was a traditional public school teacher, including here in Massachusetts and Cambridge at the traditional public high school in Cambridge, Cambridge Rindge and Latin. And I had great results for my kids. I was a special ed teacher. I have a learning disability. I was interested in special ed. 95% of my kids got back that year and passed the high-stakes MCAS exam that many of you may have heard of if you're from Massachusetts. And it was special education students who passed this exam, and they beat the general education students, and it was an incredibly high number. And instead of what I expected, I got a call, and the gentleman said, I want to come down and talk to you about your results. And I thought I was going to get Teacher of the Year. I thought that this was the moment that I was going to get the laurel and the praise and the amazing moment. And in fact, what he came down to say was, listen, Seth, we can't expect this of all kids. We can't expect this of all teachers. And you are great, and we're grateful for your work, and you're working hard, and you're putting in extra hours, and you're doing above and beyond, and you're doing all this stuff without pay. But at the end of the day, we can't expect everybody to be like you, we can't expect every kid to get these kinds of results. And I'm a debater, and I was telling Paul earlier, I debated in high school, and I'm used to and excited about debating. And it was one of the moments in my life where I remember distinctly shutting down and not being interested in debating anymore. Because I could not respond to this gentleman and give him an answer because he did not see the world the same way as I did. He did not see my kids in front of me, my special education, low-income kids of color, as the way that I did, which I saw this infinite potential for them to change the world and to be great citizens, and he did not. He saw that not as a possibility, but in fact that I was setting expectations too high and that people were going to not therefore make them. And that was the moment, and it was really a moment, like a light bulb went off in my head, when I decided I needed to leave the traditional district system and move into the charter system. A charter school, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a public school. We are publicly funded, publicly accountable, open to all students by a random lottery process. But we are independent from the district. So we don't run through the centralized bureaucracy, top-down management system that is the New York City public school system or most public school systems in America. We are totally independent. We're run by a nonprofit board of trustees that lets us have the autonomy to make decisions from the bottom up that are good for our parents and our kids, and not from a centralized management system. As a result, we have lots more autonomy and the ability to make change in much more quick ways than we could have when I was part of a traditional district system. And so I founded Democracy Prep in 2005 to use this autonomy to try to change the way that public schools work. And before I go on to talk about Democracy Prep, the thing to know about charter schools is that most of them are bad. And so I hope that you don't walk away from anything that I say thinking that charter schools are the answer, because they're not. Across the country, there's about 8,000 charter schools, and depending on what research you're reading, somewhere between half to 3/4 are mediocre to bad. But what charter schools do present is a different governance model for public schooling that allows for the autonomy for schools like mine and many others, hundreds of others, to show incredible results for low-income kids. And so that's the autonomy that we get from being a charter school that we've used at Democracy Prep to try to change the game for them. We built Democracy Prep on 5 core pillars. Data, so as you're talking about, we use formative assessments every 6 weeks to identify not just on a weekly basis, but in fact on a daily basis, which kids need tutoring and which skills, and we use that data in thoughtful ways. Time, our school day runs from 7:45 until 5:15 in the afternoon, and what that allows us to do is build in a curriculum with art and music and theater and sports for every kid every day, instead of having them be after or extra or for some kids. That's for every kid all the time. We have a rigorous academic program, so when a kid walks in the door, we say, you are going to college. It's not a question of if, it's a question of where. And that is an expectation in the college rigor when they walk in the door. We build a school culture that is both strict and warm. And those are not or, they are and. You have to be both strict and warm. You have to be both joyful and disciplined. You have to have both respect and discipline, but have it be in a fun way. And you can do all of those things together if you build your school culture right. And the last and most important thing, we'll talk about this at the end, is in terms of talent. We have the ability to hire and fire the teachers we want. And we don't have the same restrictions around certification, around traditional hiring processes that a traditional district does, and that allows us to do a lot of things. Which means that any of you that are interested in teaching should talk to me afterwards, because I can hire you. But if you want to work in the Boston Public Schools, most of you can't be hired. And that's insane. Because if I have a great history class and I want to